Ken Loach, we are very, very pleased and honored that you are here, the first master in the masterclass this year. Your film work is unique. You belong to a little group of European film directors who is concerned about society and political subjects, who takes position for the ones who lives not on the sunny side of life, who have to struggle with reality. Your films are mostly produced in Great Britain, but intended for an international audience because the themes are valid for the majority of people all over the world. You are famous for your realistic style of your films, for your socialist beliefs, and also for your political commitment. You have shown courage in staying true to your beliefs and convictions and in expressing them consistently through the medium of film. As far as I know, there is no film in your extensive body of work which doesn't have an impact to social and human matters. You have been in the film business since the early 60s. You started out as a director for television and went on working for the medium until 89, if I read it right. And from 67 until today, you have been making films for the big screen. You are very productive with a new film coming out almost every year. Ken Loach, how do you manage to get on with this tempo?
I've been really lucky, really, in being able to just to keep working, as you say. And I think one thing that various things have helped that. One is that I always work with a writer. I'm not a writer. You very kindly said screenwriter in the thing. I'm not, sadly. Because I think directing and writing are different talents and different disciplines. And I've been very lucky. I've had 3 or 4 writers I've worked with over a long period. And the ability to write is not necessarily tied to the ability to write a screenplay. That if a writer can just catches in words, that just observes, just writes dialogue, just a description, and a few words on a page, and you can see that person. You can understand what's in his or her mind. You can really see what the writer is writing, and it's the equivalent talent to an artist who can, with 4 or 5 lines of a pencil, can bring a person to life on a piece of paper, and a writer can do that in words. Now that's a quite different ability to being able to organize and shoot a film. They're not the same. But I think it's a heresy of European filmmaking that we think, I want to make a film, I have to write it myself, otherwise I'm not a real filmmaker. And it's really, believe me, it's not the same. And I couldn't write, but you know, I've been able to convince people I can direct. Directing is more about confidence tricks, really. But writing is the real talent. And when you see a film by and then the name of the director, this is just vanity. Because the film is not by the director. If it's by anybody, it's by the writer. So there are other things, but that's why I've been lucky enough to be able to keep going, is because I work with writers.
May I ask, how do you work with writers? Do you have an idea and you're going to a writer, or the writer comes to you and he says, I have an idea, can I write it for you?
By and large, it's a long-term relationship. It's like serial monogamy, really, because you get to know each other. You see the world in the same way. You laugh at the same things. You have the same preoccupations, and then out of those conversations comes an idea somewhere between you, somewhere between us, and then. We talk about it, is it a possibility, should we pursue it? And then out of that, the writer, I work with a writer called Paul Laverty at the moment, and we've worked together for about 12 years now, or more, actually. And out of that kind of constant dialogue, I mean, exchange of football scores, newspaper pieces, you know, we fax each other newspaper articles, and just the common stew of human exchange. And out of that will come an idea, a thought, a subject, and then out of that will come, Paul will go away and he'll do some research, and then he'll write down 2 or 3 characters, and we'll talk about that and the direction the film might go. And eventually Paul will write a first draft, and then then our collective job is to attack it, is to try to destroy it, is to try to pick a hole in it, really. And then he'll write another draft, and then we try to destroy that. And then he'll write another draft. And maybe after 8 or 9 attempts, we end up with a script that we want to shoot. But it's absolutely, I mean, Paul does the writing, but the film sort of emerges from between us.
And who attacks it? You and Paul, or do you give it to other people and to other, people who are very close to you? Well,
initially it's just Paul and me. And then I've got a long-term friend called Roger Smith, who I was a student with, and we worked at the BBC together. And he's a writer, but he's also a story editor. And at a certain point, we'll show it to Roger, and he will come in, and we'll then, again, he will try to ask every question that we haven't asked. But I think I wouldn't show it to anybody else. Well, the producer, Rebecca O'Brien, is obviously, she is part of that discussion. But apart from those 4 people, I don't show it to anybody. We don't show it to anybody, because I think it's private. It's private. And you can only share it with people who have who are coming from the same position. Because you show it to someone else, they will bring in another perspective.
You wouldn't show it to Margaret Thatcher?
No, certainly not. I wouldn't show it to anybody.
From the final draft, how much does it change to the screen? I mean, does the film change when you're finished with it? The script?
The final draft. Well, I guess the process is that you work to what you think is the final script that you're going to work with. But then it's words on the page, isn't it? It's words on a page. So then what we have to do then is to make it live on screen. And that's a whole... There are many aspects to that, to make it live on screen. You have to find the places you're going to film. You have to find the people to bring it to life, all of whom bring in their own personalities and their own experiences. You have to turn up on a particular day and catch the weather and the light of that time. So there are many variables. And I think it's not there's the script, therefore transfer it in a one-to-one relationship. You have to bring it to life. You have to make that story live for those people in that place at that time, with all the idiosyncrasies they've got and all the questions they will have. So this is why you've got to test it to destruction before you start. Because every question that you ask, or if you fail to ask a question in the course of working on the script, somebody will ask it when you're shooting. The actor will ask it, and then you're caught out. So you've got to know the answer, or you've got to ask the questions yourself. And so yes, it does develop, it changes, but the kind of the surface will change, but the core idea and the core relationships, if you got the script right, shouldn't change. But there have been cases where scenes that we've planned, when they've been played by the actors, have turned out in another way. And the emotional balance within the scene has changed. So when we've been shooting it, we've had to rebalance what was said so that people came out of it in the right way for the story to continue. And sometimes we've had to change a scene that followed it.
Just one little question. So, do you give your actors the script that day, the scenes that you're playing that day, or do they?
It depends. It depends. If they've got a lot of dialogue and it's narrative and it's something that they know anyway, they can have it, 2 or 3 weeks in advance. Usually at the start of the film, I usually try and give them a couple of weeks or so they really get bedded into it. I mean, the point is not to play a trick on the actors. The point is to enable them to be as good as they can possibly be. And that means that because the best thing you've got as a director, the most important thing you've got when you arrive at 8 o'clock in the morning, 7:30 in the morning, the most important thing you've got is the actor's instinct. That's what you've got to live off throughout the day. And so you've got to do everything you can to protect the authenticity of their response. So a lot of things flow from that, which we'll probably may talk about later. But that's your capital, that's the gold you've got. And you've got to protect that for all you're worth. So you want them to come with all the knowledge that they need, but anything that is going to surprise them, anything that is going to enable them to release that instinctive response, you've got to protect. So that's the sort of basic principle.
Is there any big difference between working with the actors and sort of real people on the set for you, or do you treat them basically the same way, having the same expectations?
No, it's exactly the same. Exactly the same. And I think everybody benefits. I mean, the people who are experienced actors benefit from being released from having to perform like actors all the time. I mean, it's a big release, a big relief, I think. And then they, if there are people in the film who haven't acted before, but bring in their own experience, they can be like a touchstone of reality for the people who are actors. And if it works well, then they help each other. But no, treat them exactly the same.
But I think that's a method of working. I mean, it's quite equal, the real actors and the not real actors, that you are able to put them together. I think that's rather a rare method of working. When I think of American films or also European films, it rarely happens, I think.
It's... I mean, again, you find this out when you're doing auditions, because they will have auditioned together. If you're putting a family together, for example, if you're casting a family, then when you're finding them, you have to try out, this possible mother with that possible daughter, or that possible son with that possible sister, and every relationship. So you've tried out different possibilities all through, and the ones who interact well are the ones you cast. So they've already had a good experience before they start the film, and I mean, and you have to just see how they are when they're not auditioning. What they're like when they're sitting outside or waiting in the corridor is very revealing, because the ones who sit, like just keep themselves to themselves and are very, restricted. Are probably not going to get on well with each other in those long hours between shots. I mean, you've got to find people who are easy with each other, and then not too facile, but it's just watching how people are, really, because that will be your experience when you're filming. That will be your experience of.
And this watching, it's you who watches, or do you have somebody who watches for
Oh
you?
no, no, it's not like.
When they are
it's not the KGB.
sitting around, standing around. No, but I mean, you know, to find out, is this person, this amateur, able or able to do what you are expecting?
I think it's not formalised. It's just keeping an eye out for how they are really. No, it's not. You don't set somebody to observe them or have a hidden camera.
I mean, probably we forgot a little bit to observe people. That's you know, in a absolutely normal way. That's what I mean.
Yes,
in fact,
yes.
not.
No, I
We
know.
have to have the eyes wide open.
Yeah.
Every time to get those little appearances, to get those little things happen.
Yes. And just little the little kindnesses that people offer to each other, you know, is.
Yeah.
It's not, as you say, it's not like a critical observation, but it's just something it's just part of how you are with people, isn't it?
In the casting process, do you just improvise with the characters, or do you also work on a script or on scenes?
No, we just improvise because I don't want them to have a preconception about the film. The casting process is about finding out who they are, because you're looking for someone whose characteristics, their own characteristics, you can sit very closely to the character you're finding, because then they can just play who they are, and if they reveal themselves, they will also reveal the character. So you can put them in a situation, maybe take them by surprise. They show who they really are, and it fits the character, because the character as written is waiting to be. It's like a balloon. It's waiting to be inflated by the real character of the person you find. So there has to be that space in the script for them. But the person you find, you want to when they show you who they are, then that should also fit the character in the story.
Mr. Loach, you just described a very admirable way of filmmaking. How does that work when you work with the BBC, with the public television? Is it the same way, or do you suffer from serious influences by that side, or do you have the same procedures as you just described?
Well, it's an interesting question. Now my experience is not the same as the average television director, because I've just been lucky, and I haven't worked for television for long time. When we were doing fiction at the BBC, times were very different, and we had a very free hand. So there was no problem there, basically. Then I did documentaries in television, and the censorship was very tough. And I did 7 documentaries. 4 of them were banned outright. 2 were censored and then only put out much later, and then on a restricted channel. So it was a very harsh climate, and it was straight censor. We can talk about that at length, but it's probably not what people want to talk about now. But it was just a very tough period for documentaries, and it was straight censorship, no other word. I think television directors now, directing fiction, have a very hard time. I mean, the casting has to be approved by executives in offices who don't know anything about the script, but only see the name they recognize. So that's very tough. I mean, I don't have that problem now, obviously. And the shooting schedule is very intense. There are lots of really very restrictive methods which are imposed on television directors, which fortunately I don't have to deal with now. But my experience isn't typical.
I have a question. Documentaries at that time, you did them for the BBC, right? Was it a trial for you to go into the documentary filmmaking, or was it just? How did you then come back to fiction films?
No, it was the documentaries were for an independent channel called Channel 4, not for the BBC. I did do a document for the BBC, but that was quite a tough experience as well. No, what happened was we did the film you mentioned, Kes, in the late 60s. We did another film called Family Life in 1971, 72, and that failed abysmally at the British box office. They said, the man who put the money in said rather gloomily that it didn't take enough money to pay the usherettes. You know, it didn't take enough money to pay for the people who show you to your seat. At the end of the 1970s, making a feature film was very difficult to raise the money, to work with the writer. I wasn't working well with, nothing was really working well. I wasn't getting good ideas. The writing partnerships weren't working. But politically, it was a very intense time, because 1979, Margaret Thatcher got elected. Immediately, the factories started to close. There was mass unemployment. Unemployment went up hugely, over 3 to 4 million people out of work. Great disruption, attacks on trade unions. It was a very strange time. And I thought the problem is, to make a feature film, it's going to take 2 years, and you wanted to intervene, be part of it, to make some contribution. Documentary you can make quickly, you can get it aired. 2 or 3 months, you can have done something. And I worked with an independent company for Channel 4, but as I say, it all ended in tears, and the films weren't shown anyway. So it all failed rather dismally. Bad career choice.
And would you do a documentary in these days, or would you rather always prefer fiction?
Well, I kind of prefer fiction now, because you can explore character and relationships and conflict in a particular way, and you can absorb various ideas into a narrative. And I just find that more interesting and more challenging. But I think documentary has got a really great place, and I think there's some very good documentaries being made. So I'm very enthusiastic for documentaries, but I'm not sure it's what I should do now.
Is it in connection with this era of Thatcherism that you are so focused, or is it from your own vita, where you are coming from, that you are looking for this working class especially, or this theme like social justice, where you're very in it?
Yes. Well, I guess there's two points to that. The first is the working class has the best jokes, really, undoubtedly. If you want a good time, don't go somewhere posh. Everybody knows this. If you want generosity, if you're hard up, ask poor people. Don't ask rich people. If you want support in anything, ask people who need support. And the people who live, just ordinary working class people, the experience of life is much sharper. It's much closer to the bone, in a way. And the drama is much more intense. And it's much funnier. They use language in a much richer way. Certainly in our culture. I mean, I don't know. I can't speak for any other culture, but certainly in our culture, the language is very vivid. The dialects are very rich. The language is very metaphorical. It's full of jokes. It's full of nicknames. It's full of history. So if you were just looking without any political commitment, you were just looking for a location for wit and tragedy and drama and Shit, that's not me.
It's you.
Oh, God. I thought I turned it off. If you're looking for a location for drama, then I'd always go to ordinary working class people. But there's a political dimension, obviously, because it depends on what your view of society is and how you see society and how you see it changing. And I suppose the political tendency that I grew up with in the 60s thought that change would always come from the working class. It wouldn't be imposed from above. It wouldn't be like a rich elite saying, good, we can make everybody's life better if we give up our wealth and hand it over to a collective. We didn't think that would happen. That it would only happen when people took power themselves at a moment of crisis. Therefore, it's a traditional view, but therefore the revolutionary class, to put it in old-fashioned language, the revolutionary class is the working class. Therefore, their story is particularly relevant to how society will develop. Therefore, that's where you work. So there's a political argument, but there's also a kind of cinematic or, I hate to use the word, but artistic argument.
Talking about the early years, getting from the television to the movies, was there ever a time, because when you decided to work with non-stars, with lay actors, not making maybe beautiful shots, but real shots, or authentic shots? I mean, there's hardly a beautiful shots in your film. They are beautiful because they are realistic, and they're I mean, I have the impression you never care, for example, about sunshine. I find this really interesting because from the view of a producer, probably, it is pretty hard to sell such a film. And how can you talk about the conflict?
Yes.
Maybe.
Well, it's interesting you say that. I mean, in fact, the opposite is true, really. I mean, we care intensely about light, not to make it pretty, but because it affects how you look at people. Like, for example, here. I mean, I couldn't help but notice when I walked in, here's a really good place to shoot, but it's too deep. You know, I mean, if we were choosing this as a location, you'd probably put a false wall from that picture over there, over to these columns, and maybe, obviously, turn off these lights. And then when you're sitting over there, you're really beautifully lit. You're not. Sorry.
No.
But light is really critical, because not only is it beautiful in itself, but if you light somebody sympathetically, then you engage with them subconsciously, I think, much more than if you light them harshly. If you use a sympathetic lens, you engage with them much more than if you light them harshly. So I mean, we study lights very, very closely. The camera. I mean, the key point in selecting a camera position is light. I mean, that's the first priority, is light. And the composition of the shots is critical, you know. So it's not. It should look unconsidered. It should look as though we just happen to be here. Oh, we just happen to have caught that person doing that thing. But actually, the framing and the lens and the lights are critical, and very, very deeply considered.
How can you finance your films in these days? If I understand it right, you don't have any problems to get the money for your new.
Touch wood, touching wood, as I say. I think it's we're cheap.
May we ask what's cheap?
Cheap
in pounds.
Cheap in pounds is about £2.5 million for a feature film, which is €4 million. What is it? Yeah, about 4 million euros. I mean, at one level, it's not cheap at all, but at the level of, you know, feature films with everybody paid well above union rates and no undercrewing, and you know, it's not expensive. No. We shoot for on average 6 weeks, and the money is their European co-productions. So there is we've been very lucky. We've had really loyal distributors in all most of the European countries, like in France with Diaphano, and got a good distributor here, one in Spain, one in Italy, one in Belgium, that we've worked with, have backed us for 20 years or more. So, and they are able to cover their costs, and then they come back for more. So we've been really lucky. But without the European co-production, we couldn't have carried on.
You mentioned that you're shooting your in sequences, and you're also doing improvisation, and you only have 6 weeks for a shoot. This sounds
impossible.
Yeah, it's almost impossible. How do you get prepared to go on set and be ready for what you're going to expect, and how do you manage to get all this in this short amount of time? Because it's also cost relevant, of course.
Yeah. Well, like you have to have everything. You have to have the whole film cast before you start. You have to have all the locations in place. You have to have walked around and decided basically how you're going to shoot it. Of course, things change in the course of the shooting. Of course, you lose days here and there, but we always build in little, you know, a half day at this point, a half a day at that point. And we only do 5-day weeks now because the insurers won't insure you when you get very old for 6-day weeks, which everybody's very pleased about because 5-day weeks are much nicer than 6-day weeks. So everybody has a normal life, you know. We try and recruit technicians from the city we work in. So we were working in Manchester, so you know, half the crew were from 2/3 the crew were from Manchester. But it's just preparation, being prepared, working with people you know. I mean, the cameraman I've worked with now for nearly 20 years, nearly 20 years. So there's a danger with that. The danger is you enter a comfort zone in which, oh, we know how to do this. You know, we know how to do that. We'll just a light out there and a bit of polystyrene. We know how to do it. You know, you have to keep pushing each other. You have to stay challenging. You know, and because otherwise, with having worked with the same crew for a long time, you can get complacent.
If you shoot so in an unexpected way, where you even don't know how the people are going to react, how does it affect the editing?
Well, you have to construct the scene, the sequence in shot so that you can pretty well cut at any point. That's the key thing.
So you do masters?
No, well, not exactly. No. It's quite complicated. The order you take the shots in is crucial. When in that situation, you see, we had a shot of the postman, Eric, one way, and we shot that first, and then we did the reverse on Eric Cantona, so that we could cut back to Eric Cantona at any point. But sometimes you want to be on a closer shot, and the closer shot is usually when you want the emotional bit on the closer shot. So often we'd maybe do the closer shot first, because that's where you'll get the strongest performance, and then do the looser shot, and then do the shot looking the other way. But the order in which you do the shots is very important. It's to do with how you think the performances will unroll. And sometimes you just have to mark it. You know, sometimes we'll mark the camera position and the height of the camera and the exact position, and take the scene up to a certain point, and then go round and do another shot, because we think, because you're going to get the first bit of the performance looking this way, then the next, for the actor's sake, you want to give, you don't want to do 10 takes looking that way, and then when you come and do the actor this way, he's exhausted and he's not as good. So you've got, in a sense, be fair around the cast. So you maybe do 2 or 3 looking this way, which you get the opening part of the sequence, mark it, go around the other way and film the next bit when, say, these group of characters or this character is going to be really at their peak, and then hold it and come back and replace the camera here. And of course that means you maybe have to tweak the lights just a little bit. But if you like the space and not the particular action, then you don't have to make big changes. You know.
Did I understand it right? So you are like storyboarding when you arrive on the scene in the morning at 8. You do like say there's the camera, there's the light, or do you do it in advance before?
I'd never storyboard.
Okay.
I would never. I mean, we sort of work out the basic angles. Yes. I mean, when we find the locations, we find the locations with light in mind. Light is what part of this. I mean, you might find a fantastic room, but it'll be too difficult to light, or you won't get nice pictures because the lights won't be good. So light is critical. When you're finding the locations, you're thinking these are basically the angles we're going to shoot from. And then I go around with Barry, the cameraman, or Chris, whichever, and we'll work out basically how we'll light it and basically how the action might unfold, within what parameters. And then on the day, and then we have another recce with the main electricians, and the main electrician, we only have about 2 or 3 sparks anyway, but just to work out just where the basic lights will be. Then on the day, we'll come in, we'll have I've got the basic plan in my mind, I've got a sequence of shots in mind, and I'll just talk through the action with the actors. We don't rehearse. So they come in and we might just have muttered the words, you know, not played them, but just sort of thought them in our heads as they walked around. And I say, does this feel okay, or where would you naturally go? And they'll say, well, I would naturally go here. Well, if I've been clever, that's where we've arranged the furniture so that they will go there. You know, it's like I often say, it's a bit like if you want water to run downhill, you dig a channel, right? Well, you dig the channel for the actors so that they will do naturally what you want them to do. So that you don't say, I want you to go over there. You arrange it in such a way that they will go over there. And then they feel in control of it. And they are in control of it. They're following their instinct. But they're doing what will make a good shot.
And then you do rehearsals before?
No, and then we just film. And the first take may well be a complete cock-up. But then you just go back and try it again. But sometimes you get something in the first take you never get again. And if that's happened on rehearsal, you just kick yourself, you know.
Just one question. Does it happen that you take just one shot of a scene, the first shot you think it's just perfect? You don't do another one, a second one?
Sometimes it depends. It depends really. Sometimes
you don't make a safety.
I usually try and have 2 good takes, just in case. Because sometimes, you know, things can go wrong. It's useful to have 2 takes. Just continuity things can go wrong. It depends on the emotional temperature. I mean, most scenes are not emotional. Most scenes are very functional. So yes, you do a couple of takes and you just refine the action a little bit. So it varies. But we tend to do very long takes so that we'll run the whole scene. Because I hate it when you pick up a scene in the middle, because what makes a good performance? What makes a good performance is what's gone before. It isn't the moment you say, oh God, and there's so many things to say about this. I mean, it's not, I mean, we never say action. Never say action. Because everybody's like they've got an electric shock, you know, and the action, I've got to act. I mean, what you want is something seamless that has just emerged from what they've done before. So often, if we're shooting something, we'll play what's just happened before, so that that's what you give direction about, what's happened before. And then they play that scene, and on the back of that, they come in and they're in the right frame of mind for what you want to shoot. So it's a reaction to what they've just done. And then, if you play the whole scene, we don't know which bit of it we get of that angle we're going to use. So you may do 2 or 3 takes, and you don't know quite how it's going to intercut, because it depends on the rhythm of what they say and the rhythm of the interaction, you know, where it's natural to take a pause. And you don't know that until you've played it, and until you're in the cutting room and you can put the two side by side. So if you run the sequence, run the whole sequence on one shot, then you probably do need to do 2 or 3 takes, because you might have a good early bit in this take and a good end bit in another take.
I'd like to know, in a way, I've heard out of what you've said, you've been suggesting, the less influence you take as a director, the better, in a way. Let the actors, let the players discover it for themselves. And I would absolutely agree with that, but in the same way, I'd like to know if you've ever encountered moments where a scene didn't play out at once, where you didn't have it in take 1 or take 2, and you felt like you had to encircle it a bit more, the scene, in order to come to the core. And what methods have been so efficient for you there?
Yes, I mean, I think it's not that the director shouldn't have influence. It's just how you exercise it early on, in the casting and in the very early days, when you're just pointing people in the direction, so that what they do thereafter will work. So it's not a lack of work or involvement. It's where it is and how it's done, and that has to be really early. Because if you ever get to the point where you know, and I know directors who have done this, and I've been directed by people who do it, and they say, no, I want you to say the line like this. You've failed, absolutely failed, because it doesn't come from inside, it just comes from here. And I don't know if you'd agree as an actor, but when a director tells you how to say a line, it's absolutely failure. And it never works, never ever works. So you have to be, you know, the work, it's like in, to use a terrible metaphor, it's like when you're planting, you know, you have to put the goodness in the soil, not in trying to prune the plant afterwards, you know. But how you do it when it's gone wrong, it's very difficult. And I've certainly had occasions when that's happened. And I think, well, the first thing is to lose your script or something, so that you have to stop, really, or have a tea break, so that because usually when things are going wrong, actors are in a downward spiral, and whatever you do, it makes it worse, and the spiral goes down and down. So take a break, go outside, or wherever, change the movement, change something physical, so that without thinking that they've got to do something different, they do have to do something different. And then change a line or two, and just try to find a simpler way of getting to where you've got to be. But I think it's I think it's never the actor's fault, really. It's a funny thing, but it's never the actor's fault. It's always the fault of the... When it's gone wrong, I know it's all those things I've done wrong. It's misjudgments I've made. I've said the wrong thing. The most common way it happens, I think, is one wrong word. One wrong word from the director can send an actor on a whole wrong train of thought.
A wrong word in the script?
No, wrong word of direction.
Okay. Direction.
And I think, I mean, I think the best way is whatever, is if you want to indicate a certain way of doing something, is to put it in the form of a question to an actor. You know, would you think of doing that? And they would, yeah, well, I might or I might not. Okay, well, if you would, how would you? And what would help you? Say they get into angry in a scene. You know, the emotion is too over the top. What would minimise your anger? What could happen that would make you not so angry? Oh, well, if such and such happened. Okay, well, we'll make that happen. So something out, because acting is reacting. So it's something outside that you change so that the reaction is different.
I'd also like to know, what do you think of other methods, like, for instance, Sidney Lumet? I've heard that he's doing a lot of rehearsal in advance. Before he starts shooting, he goes with the actors for 1-2 weeks. And for instance, on Dog Day Afternoon, he had the whole script change enormously because they discovered that they improvised a lot, and he had new dialogue in the script, and he felt that the script had become much better out of this. And how do you feel for these methods? Would that work for you? Did you ever try it out? Because I'm impressed in a way that it seems to me you've known so early on which is what is your methods. Have there been defining moments for you where you?
Yeah, I think, I mean, what you describe, I'm sure there's no one way or no one way being more valid than another. For me, it sounds too laborious. I think you've got to keep a sense of spontaneity of something for the first time. And I think if you dig away at something in advance, it's very difficult to keep that sense of lightness. I think it needs to be light, not dug into. I mean, even the most serious and tragic emotions need to have, because you do see laborious work on film that in the theatre you wouldn't see because your perception is different. But in film, you do see what's behind the eyes, and I think if you labour away at something, you kill that spark. Yes, there were 1-2 things, and I'm sure you all have moments when you've learned things in your work, and I'm sure they're equally as valid as anything I had. But when I started in television, I did police series, and it was live television, and you had 3 weeks to. You got given the script, you had 3 weeks, you had to cast it, you had to rehearse it, you had to mark it out in the studio, and then it was live, and it was filmed like live, so it's like theatre, really. And I found that we had a read-through, always had a read-through. There was the first day of rehearsal, and all the actors would come together, and they would read it. And the read-through was often quite good. In fact, it was the best performance that you ever got. And then I would work at it for 10 days. And at the end, it was like lead. I'd squashed everything out of it. And sure, they hit their marks and they said the words, but it was weighed down with heaviness. So after that, I scrapped the read-through. So we just never read through, and you just come and you explore it as you do it. And you explore it until you feel it's like cooking, the cake has just risen in the oven and you just got it and then you just move on. And I think it's keeping that sense of lightness, sense of exploration, really.
from all that, I understand that works on the premises that the actor really identifies with the role. And you mentioned that you have to create a certain atmosphere and that then there is improvisation. But what are your tricks? I mean, I guess it bases a lot on confidence, but maybe you can explain a little bit how you create that atmosphere.
I don't know, getting nice people to work with, really. It's the main thing. Just work with people who are nice. So that, I mean, what is key is you don't give them cars. You don't give them caravans. No cars, no caravans, no trailers, no stand-ins. You know, like they're just one of the gang, really. And they queue up for their food, like, but, you know. So there's no special treatment, which is a huge relief, I found, to actors, because then they don't have to be anybody special at all. They're just like the guy who handles the props. And it's a huge relief. And it's part of acceptance. It's part of being part of the gang, you know, really. And then they'll be as, you know, because actors are very brave people, I think. They're hugely vulnerable, and they're prepared to be very brave. It's the bravest job on the film. So you've got to give them the protection and the security and the approval, but no indulgence. And it's obvious. It's obvious, really, isn't it? It's obvious.
Are you promoting younger filmmakers? Are you looking for somebody that continues your work?
Well, it's quite difficult. I mean, that would be quite a full-time occupation, really. And I think that's the job of film festivals. You know? I mean, if you're working, you're just working, you know, because it takes up all your time. So maybe it's something I should do more, but I just find life, because to actually do that, it would mean viewing a lot of films. I mean, if people send stuff, I try and see it and write back, you know, but that can take quite time consuming, you know, and if you're just knocking films out, then you don't have a lot of time, really. And also, I mean, I'm a prisoner of my generation, just as everyone is, you know, and bound by that and limited by it, and my tastes are of that generation. So it's inevitable that people who are progressive now will be different, and I might not recognize it. You know, I mean, it's because every generation has its own experience and is radical in its own way and is subversive in its own way, and often it's by shocking the older generation. You know, and I'm not entirely immune from that, so I'm probably not the best person to. But you know, you can still recognise a rebel when you see one. So.
Back to It's a Free World. She's very ruthless, and unlike in My Name Is Joe, where he redeems himself to a certain extent, the ending of It's a Free World it's very realistic, absolutely no question. But I did ask myself, why don't you have no mercy for her whatsoever? She doesn't. She just continues being ruthless, and although it's realistic, I was still surprised.
Well, we thought about the ending quite a lot, really. We thought about the ending, and about how the story should end. And I think in a way, what decided us in the end was that you have to be true to the characters you've created, and that you can't create a character who is bound on one course and then mechanically get her to change her position. You know, otherwise you're betraying your own character. The character's got to drive you. Otherwise you're playing false. And given who she was and how she developed, that we thought that's what she would do. But also, it's true of the mechanics of capitalism anyway. If Angie has a change of heart, someone else will provide cheap labour. So that's the reality of the situation. I mean, so we thought it was not only true to Angie, but true to the wider picture, because capital is ruthless and has to be, otherwise it goes out of business. capitalism cannot afford morals, because otherwise you go bankrupt and somebody else takes over. So we felt that we had to be true to the character, but it was also true to the wider situation.
What was the inspiration for this film?
It was well. It was first of all just seeing lots of immigrant workers and speaking to them and hearing their stories. And we heard far worse stories than we put in the film, actually. But we thought we didn't want it to be like just a horror show. So I was listening to them. And then Paul just rang up one day. He said, "I've got a character, Angie," and so that was where she began, really.
Talking about endings, I was very sad in the end of My Name is Joe. It's an open end. You don't know if they will be together or not. Why did you choose to finish it like this, to end it like this?
Well, it's again. I mean, what Joe has done is so disastrous, and Sarah's the character Louise plays there's a fragility to her, and it's just whether she would have the strength to cope with him. Really, I think she would be fearful that she wouldn't have the strength to cope with Joe. So while she's, there's obviously a strong bond between them. We just felt it would be too corny if they just walked off arm in arm, really. So they just walk off side by side. But I mean, suggesting there's still a separation, that they may come together, they may not. But it's a very tough world that Joe inhabits, and I think Sarah's, she can cope with it at a professional level. But I think often you can cope with things at a professional level by keeping your private life safe. For someone in her position to risk her private life is a big thing. We just didn't feel she would do it. She'd be too close.
Did it ever happen in one of your films that you were shooting two ends because you haven't been sure of the ending, so you have the possibility to put another end? No. No,
not really, because the again, you've got to be true to the characters. I mean, the characters are telling you what they would do. I think you have a sense by then of when you're suggesting something false, really. You raised the question of camera work, didn't you, before? Yeah. Yes.
With the improvisation and the camera work. But I think now I understand it better how you work with the discussion scene too.
Yes. I mean, one thing I've found, and I don't know if people have found the same, is that the choice of lens is really important. I mean, something that I kind of tried to learn early on when I was beginning was just the characteristics of different lenses, and that if you're respecting the performers on the one hand, you don't want to get too close, because there's nothing more disturbing than having a camera like that. So that means you can't use a wide-angle lens. And equally, you don't want to use a telephoto lens, because that suggests you're looking down a telescope. And so the most humane lenses are the ones that correspond to the human eye, or maybe just a fraction tighter, because then it's like you're concentrating. If you're looking at something and you concentrate on it, you eliminate what's on the side. So there's like a tight. I mean, on 35mm, we range between usually range between a 50 and a 100, or occasionally a 135. And that's fixed lenses, not zooms. Fixed lenses on that gives you the sense of being an observer, which helps to create this feeling that the thing is really happening. And the other thing that very early on I kind of learned not to do were tracking shots. Because tracking shots, everybody, same term? Everybody knows what tracking shots are? Yes, obviously. You know, where you put the camera on a platform, on a dolly, and it moves along, and on a crane, and it moves up, and out of the window, and down to the shop next door, and all that. I found that they were a complete waste of time, because it's a massive exercise, because you've got to lay the tracks, you've got to work out where the actors are going to walk. You've got to, the camera's moving, they're moving, so the focus is always difficult. It's a nightmare for the focus puller, because he's got two moving objects instead of one moving object, which is just the actor with a fixed camera. So that's easy. And so you've got the difficult for the focus puller, difficult is for the boom, obviously, and difficult is for the camera operator, because if there's dialogue, you've got to keep the frame right, and you usually want the person, well, sometimes you want the person speaking to be in the frame, and so the balance of the heads or the relationship of the people has got to be right. And you can spend all day on it. You may be on something you could shoot in, you know, a tenth of the time if it was just a fixed camera. And then the take you end up using is the one that works technically, but it's probably got the worst performance. So, and yet a lot of people still do it. But I just found it a complete waste of time and actually produced bad work. And the other thing you can't do very easily is cut. And because you may want to change the rhythm of the performances or the rhythm of the scene, if it's all in one long track, you can't do it. You're stuck with it. Because it's, well, you can cut out, but then it's a very jagged cut. And what are you going to cut to? So I found it much easier to keep the camera on a tripod, let the actors move, and that way it's more fluid. You use the one, you know, obviously it's a fixed lens, so it's like your eye, and you get the kind of, it's also the best for the actors, because you can use their best performance.
What kind of movies besides your own maybe are influential for you? For example, just to name, Sweet Little 16, for example. Is there some influence from, I don't know, from gangster movies, from for example, from Goodfellas, because you like this film and you wanted to make a story which is more real or which is playing in your home country?
No, the films that I liked when I was younger, because I think what influences you when you're young is key, because after that you try to work things out for yourself, I think. No, they were the East European films, or the Czech films particularly, but also Polish films, Andrzej Wajda, and the Czech films of Miloš Forman and Jiří Mencel and other directors then. The Italian films, obviously, the neo-realist films of the 50s and 60s. Some of the French films, Robert Bresson, particularly. But of all of them, it was the Czech films, which were I just found absolutely right and delightful and funny, but true and humane and touching. And I don't think they've been, I mean, again, you know, you get old, you get set in what you like, but I haven't seen films that are better. You know. It's to do with the moment in time when they were made, I guess. But they were certainly the ones that touched me anyway.
How do you edit? Do you edit with the editor together? Do you leave it alone?
No, when we're shooting, I I'd barely look at rushes actually. We maybe look at a few rushes, maybe the first few days, just to see, you know, if there's anything I'm not picking up, and then we just leave it and maybe have a break after shooting, and then the editor starts at the end, and we just look at it scene by scene and cut then, because I think it's very difficult to choose takes when you're shooting, because for two reasons. First of all, you tend to look at rushes at the end of the day. You're absolutely knackered. Your judgment's shot, and you can't tell, and everything looks bad, and you just get totally depressed, exhausted, and you're buggered for the next day. So, and the rest of the crew come sometimes see them, and they think, my God, what are we wasting our time on? And so we stop seeing rushes, and and then we just start in the cutting room, just see one sequence at a time, and then just begin at the beginning. I think the other reason you can't choose rushes when you're shooting or before you cut is that you don't know, well, for me anyway, I don't know which bit of the shot we're going to need. So what might look like the best take overall won't match the other take. You know, you'll have cut if you're building the sequence up, you cut a piece off one take, and that leaves the momentum in a certain way, so that you want to cut on in one pause, on one phrase, or on one look. And you can only know which bit of the other angle is going to exactly fit that when you've done the earlier choice. You can't judge it until you've done that earlier choice. So I find seeing rushes in advance was by and large a waste of time, not to say rather depressing. So we just build it up bit by bit, and the first cut we get is usually long, but it's not a rough cut. It's not an assembly. It's actually a real cut so the scene works, and we've gone through, found what we think are the best takes to build up to make the sequence. And then it's a question of looking back and overall putting a shape on the film, because obviously on the first cut, some scenes will be too long, some don't make the point, some are too indulged. You've left one little joke in because you like it, but it detracts from the scene afterwards, and so on. So the second time through is to make the shape. But it's quite a nice bit of the job, because you go to work at 9 o'clock and you finish at 5:30, and you can get coffee in the winter.
And with looking for Eric, how long do you edit now?
We've just done 8 weeks and got to the end of the first cut, and it'll be about another 4 weeks to a fine cut.
So it's like 3 months.
Yes, longer if you can spin it out, because it's a good job for the winter, really. It's a really good winter job. You have to make it last.
Any questions to editing? Marcus?
When you edit the movies, do you work with temp tracks, or do you get your musician already involved, or do you work silently, totally silently? Or?
Oh no, we work, and I guess this will get some mocking laughter here. We cut on film on a Steenbeck. Oh God, the guy's living in the Stone Age. I just find it easier. It doesn't take us any longer. I don't think it takes any longer. Obviously, cut by cut, it can seem to take you longer, but the pauses are useful for reflection, and it's quite a civilized way to work. And also, it's easier. I guess it's what you're used to. You know, I mean, it's what I grew up with, and therefore I find it easier to relate to. I can judge pauses, rhythm better on a Steenbeck, much easier than on an Avid or computer. But I think that's just what you get used to. So yes, so we cut on film, but we're just with the Rush's sound. But we use all location sound. Obviously, I wouldn't ADR unless, you know, it's just the occasional word. So we've got our Rush's track of the sound recorded, and we just cut to that. And the musician I work with, I don't show it to him till it's cut, because again, but again, it's only what I do. I mean, everybody else will do something different, and that's nothing is better or worse. It's just different. But again, it's just I've found that musicians again respond to what they see and will get ideas, and they think, yes, you know, that moment, I can just put that in it, and it's that sound, it's that instrument, it's that rhythm. Whereas if you talk about it in advance, it's academic, because you've got the composer then got to imagine it, and then come up with an idea. If you see it, his musical instinct will play with it. So I found that's better. I mean, occasionally, I've been working with a guy called George Fenton for a long time, and sometimes when we did films in Latin America, he suggested some instruments that we might incorporate into the actuality sound that he could echo in the music. So things like that. But by and large, I think it's better. Don't say anything. Just watch this. What do you think? And then they have much more adrenaline, and it's out of the adrenaline that they compose. You know, come out and they're sort of buzzing because they've enjoyed it. Worse if they haven't, then you're in trouble. But yeah, if they haven't enjoyed it, you're really in trouble. But if they have, then you have a very productive conversation.
I just wonder, what filming ratio do you have?
Quite high, about 25 to 1. Or 25 to 1, or sometimes 30 to 1. It depends. But I think it's such a huge effort to get everything together to film that you've got to be free to just use the stock. Really, I mean that is quite high. But if you're working fast, it also is a sense of liberation, really. You know, you're then not afraid to make a mistake or just to take a chance or try something out. You know, and it's only film, and I think it's a real liberation. That we shot on 16mm for quite a time because the budgets were low. But I'd rather shoot on Super 16 with the freedom to use as much stock as you need than shoot on 35 and be really constricted.
So does it mean that you're not doing much takes, but you're covering a lot? Because I'm wondering now why the aspect ratio is so high, actually.
It's because the takes are quite long. You know, when I was saying earlier, we'd shoot the whole scene.
Yeah.
So, I mean, may only do 4 or 5 takes, maybe a few more, but each take can be quite long. So
Okay.
often, you know, you might do 5-6 minutes each take. Probably.
Mm-hmm. I see.
So it's out of that, you might only use 20 seconds, something. So that's where it comes. So it's certainly not doing takes over and over and over again, because that destroys everybody. Really destroys everybody.
But does it mean that the scenes are longer than they are in the script? Because I mean, in the end, you have a 90-minute script. And
yeah. Yes, can be. Yes, can be. It can be that. It can be just we do a long run in and a long run out. I mean, sometimes the scenes like that discussion scene we saw. I mean, you know, each time we did it, it would play for the equivalent of 2 magazines. You know, 15 minutes or so, maybe. So that it's. But I think just to get the sense of liberation amongst people, that they can really say what they want to say and not feel inhibited, then You've just got to let it run. But knowing, I mean, the director in you has to know that you can, at any point, you can cut out, you can cut away to somebody. You've got plenty of material to cut it to the length you need. You know, so it shouldn't be an indulgence. It should be a way of finding those moments that have a kind of sense of spontaneity, but being both precise and spontaneous. I mean, this is the two things that are pulling you every minute of every day. A, it's got to be precise, but B, it's going to feel spontaneous. You know, and the two things pull you in opposite directions, obviously.
Markus?
Yes, I was wondering, when you try to keep, during the shoot, you try to keep everything spontaneous and you think about improvisation, but in terms of editing, it sounds like a little bit like the opposite.
Yeah,
because you're sitting right next to the editor, he has almost no chance to surprise you with another idea or another way to cut the same scene than you were planning to shoot during the shooting. And working on a Steenbeck is quite old-fashioned, but it also doesn't allow you to say, okay, let's to put this one on the side and try to focus from the other side or.
Well, I mean,
you're very restricted.
Yeah, well, the editor is all the time. I mean, he's somebody I've known for a long time. I mean, he's all the time. I mean, every decision is one we share. I mean, it's not me sitting there saying, cut this, cut that. I mean, all the time he's, you know, I mean, we just talk about it all the time. But also I think the moment you put the first shot on the screen, you start to develop a logic to it, so that so that you can't. I mean, if you would suddenly say, okay, let's turn this scene back to front, well, it's got to relate to the scene that went before. You know, it's like having a wide-angle shot down here and then a tight shot from up there. There's no logic to it. There's got to. It's like music. It's like sonata form, whatever. There's the moment you put a like one shot up, that demands a response, and that shot in turn demands a response, a visual, emotional, narrative response.
Yes, but it's the actors also. Sometimes I compare it like an instrument. Some actors, the performance, when you watch it in one road, you think, oh, maybe he's too girlish or he's too tacky or his performance isn't the way. Maybe we dim him a little down during the whole film. Then you have to go back and when you do it on film, it's hard work to go after every little thing. When on a computer, it's much easier. You just go back to the scene and you can put in the same spot. And
I think it's whatever you find the easiest, really. It's whatever you find the easiest. I find the fact of just looking at having one image on the screen at the time, you just get I get a better sense of rhythm about it. And I find there's quite an advantage in not having umpteen versions, to be honest, because I mean, at one point you think one is right, so just stick with it.
I have a question. You mentioned that you're working very closely with Paul on developing the scripts, with your cinematographer, your editor. What is the role of Rebecca, your producer, in all this, in the entire process? And is she the first one with you in the editing or after the editing and sound?
Well, again, every producer has a different character and has a different sort of contribution to make. But, I mean, Rebecca's has many roles. First of all, we have to share the idea with her, or she shares the idea with us and becomes part of the trio committed to it right at the very beginning, and has things to say about it. I mean, she isn't just someone who says, okay, that's what we'll do. I mean, she has a contribution to make and reflections on it, which is part of what it finally becomes. but specifically, I mean, she will arrange the finance. She will, in a way, make a safe space for the people to make the film. I mean, that's really what it's about. It's creating that safe space, always defending the imperatives from the film. You know, like we really made a mess of one big scene. Say, okay, we really have to reshoot it. So we have to find the resources to reshoot it, and we have to reschedule, and all that. And Rebecca will make that her priority. You know, the cameraman I learned. Whatever little bit I know about film photography was a guy called Chris Menges. And Chris worked on the first feature film I did as an operator. And we talked, and we kind of got along. And we both, I was talking about the Czech films earlier, we both shared an enthusiasm for these films when they came out. And we talked about the kind of lenses they were using and the kind of camera work they were using. Then Chris got the chance to work as an assistant to a Czech cameraman, Miroslav Ondřiček, who worked on Lindsay Anderson's If. And Chris Menges worked as Miroslav Ondřiček's assistant on this film, learned a lot from him. Chris then I worked with Chris as the cameraman on Kes, the film we were talking about earlier with the boy and the bird, and tried to use some of the ideas that Chris we talked about with the kind of lighting, the kind of lenses, the kind of camera positions, and so on, the camera as an observer. And those ideas, in a way, they weren't entirely Chris's, they weren't entirely mine, they were somewhere between us. And I worked with Chris for a long time, and then various things happened, and I worked with another, still very good friends with Chris. I mean, he's a great guy, great cameraman. But I worked with another cameraman called Barry Ackroyd. And Barry had worked as a documentarist, as Chris had. He'd also was very much in the tradition of Chris's work. We talked about the kind of light we wanted. We talked about the basic style we wanted to adopt. And Barry had a particular contribution to make, which was a very intuitive sense of camera movement. Like he would find the action and follow it so that he wasn't ahead of the action, but he was like an observer in the room. He went as you would with your eye. And
that sounds like tracking shots.
No, it's just a fixed camera. Yeah, it's a movement. Yeah, just a movement. Don't say you're...
Just asking questions.
Yeah, no, exactly. But so that, again, what we came up with wasn't entirely Barry, it wasn't entirely me, it wasn't entirely Chris. It was something that came out of that, discussion. And the same is true of editing, and so on. So it's not perfect. It's got to be live. People have got to be able to say, "Well, I don't think that worked last time. We've got to try something else." So it's not. But I think it can't be based on conflict either. Does that make sense?
So you work always with the same people, the same editing, the same cameraman.
Yeah.
And you said you are shooting every 18 months a film?
Something like that.
So all those people you are working with, they work as a group for other directors?
Yeah.
The same or just...
Oh, no.
No, it's not the same group of people you are working together and they are working for another...
No.
But you have the chance to get them all the time when you are ready for a new film?
No, not always. I've worked with one or two different cameramen. Yeah, but Barry's done most of them, and Chris Menges have done most of them. But I think it is, you've got to have a disposition towards the same taste, and then sort of refine it in the actual work, I think.
I haven't seen all of your films, but I was just wondering, have you ever tried to write film sets in the upper class?
We've had, not entirely set, we've had parts from you know, kind of wealthier people or professional people or politicians. And they're always very hard parts to cast. They're very hard parts to cast because I think actors who, well, the rich and the powerful have their own dialect, but upper-class actors have a very modulated voice, which by and large doesn't have the dialect in it. I mean, you listen to the Queen. You know, the Queen. She, you know, if you can think of it without it setting your teeth on edge. She has a way of talking, which is, you know, it sends shivers down your spine. But it is the upper class, the British ruling class voice. Well, posh actors, by and large, don't have that because they've learned to modulate their voice. Whereas working class actors, by and large, have kept their dialect.
But would you say that was the main reason why you haven't made more films? Or?
It's one of the reasons. I didn't find them as interesting as characters because their lives have been more protected. So their emotions aren't as raw. So, I mean, I suppose it's like, you know, like a writer or whatever. I'm just not drawn to them as also they tend to look more perfect. You know, they're less blemished. Sorry? Yes. Yeah. Well, it would be I mean, most films are about upper class people. Most films are about rich people.
I think we have to come to an end now. Ken has to head back to London for Eric. Well, thank you so much for being here. It was very inspiring for me personally. Maybe you can also share some of your impressions later on. And thank you, Madeleine, for accompanying us today.
Thank you so much.
And yeah, we're eager to see many, many more films of yours.
Yes.
Thank you so
yes,
much.
Please.
Well, thank you. It's been really, I hope I haven't talked too much. Thanks so much.